I never thought I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life takes such unexpected turns that you need to speak out, at least in order to figure it out for yourself. My name is Penelope, and at 35, I've experienced more joy and pain than I could ever have imagined. The world I once knew has collapsed, leaving me picking up the pieces and trying to figure out where everything went so terribly wrong. I'll start from the beginning. A year ago, I filed for divorce from Richard, my ex-husband, and despite what you might think, we managed to maintain peace and civility. Richard was still a rich man, and he was generous in the arrangement. He left me our large house in the suburbs, where I live with our son Tommy, and an apartment in the city that provides a stable rental income. The house is beautiful, with a spacious backyard where Tommy loved to play, and the apartment is in a great location, which allows me to never worry about finding tenants. "Mom, when is Dad coming?" Tommy asked me almost every day with his big blue eyes full of hope and innocence. He was 6 years old, and despite the divorce, Richard remained in his life. "This weekend, honey, remember? He promised to take you to the park." I would say I'm grateful that at least this part of our broken family is still working. Richard arrived every Saturday morning. His expensive car pulled up to our entrance at exactly 9 in the morning, never late. He would come out, smile at me with a short, almost formal smile, put his hand on Tommy's shoulder, ask him about school, and a minute later they were leaving. I watched them go, realizing that our former lives were somewhere in the past, and now we're just moving forward as best we can. "You're doing great, Mel," he told me one day, dropping Tommy off after their walk. "I know it's not easy, but you're handling it better than anyone else." My own family situation has always been difficult. My parents divorced when I was 3 years old, and my mother remarried pretty quickly. I still remember the confusion when a new man suddenly appeared in the house, calling himself my father. A year later, Jessica was born to her. My stepsister was growing up, and we were never close. We maintained what I would call a politely detached relationship. Different fathers, different personalities, different lives. "Why don't you and Aunt Jessica spend time together like the other sisters?" Tommy asked me one night at dinner, poking at the peas he was trying not to eat with a fork. I remember pausing before answering. "Sometimes sisters are just different, darling, but that's okay. For example, you don't always want to play with all the kids in your class." "But she never comes to my birthday parties," he remarked, finally putting a spoonful of peas in his mouth. "Jessica is very busy with her own life," I explained, although the truth was more complicated. Jessica always seemed to resent our family dynamic, especially after my father continued to support me financially through college while her own father struggled to make ends meet. Looking back, I can now clearly see the warning signs that once seemed insignificant and easy to explain to me: Jessica's subtle eye roll when I mentioned my new car, the ambiguous compliments about my happy marriage to Richard that seemed to harbor a subtle tinge of venom, her sudden busyness every time when I invited her to family gatherings at our house, and that cold, restrained smile that she hid behind forced politeness when she listened to stories about my successes. "Your sister is just jealous," Sarah, my close friend, who always had an unmistakable sense of falsehood in people, told me. "Some people just can't stand it when others are doing better than them." At that time, I just smiled and waved it off, assuring myself that a family remains a family, that at some point Jessica and I will find a common language, and that any gap between us can be bridged. I was so naive. Everything changed after the death of my grandmother, my father's mother. She was a simple woman who had lived all her life in a modest house on the outskirts of the city, in a place where the heavy, creaking door still remembered my father's childhood steps, and the window sills were bursting with bright geraniums, which she grew with the same care with which she once raised me. The funeral was modest, but dignified, exactly what she probably wanted it to be. I was ready to say goodbye, but I didn't expect to hear that she left me everything in her will: the house, the old furniture that hid the memories of several generations, and savings that I didn't even know I had. "Your grandmother always had a soft spot for you," my father told me after the funeral, his voice strangled, and his eyes were red from tears and fatigue. She liked that you visited her every Sunday, even after the divorce. She said you had a kind heart, like your dad. I wish Tellme would spend more time with her, I replied quietly, watching my son place a bouquet of daisies on her grave, which he picked in our garden that morning. Mom, is great-grandmother in heaven now? What is it? He asked, his small hand sliding into mine. Yes, darling, I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his trust. And I'm sure she's already baking her famous chocolate chip cookies there. For some reason, those words stuck in my head, echoing back as I pondered the unexpected inheritance. I didn't know yet that it would change everything. A few days later, my parents asked me to come to their house. It was supposed to be an important family discussion, but as soon as I crossed the threshold, I felt tension in the air. The house smelled of my mother's signature stew, but the familiar comfort was now overshadowed by an atmosphere of expectation of something unpleasant. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table, the one where countless family dinners had been held and which still bore the scratches left by Jessica in her teenage years. Would you like some coffee? What is it? She asked, even though she had already poured me a cup, knowing that I would not refuse. I took the mug, feeling the hot ceramic warming my palms, but the warmth couldn't banish the chill that gripped my stomach with a premonition of something bad. We need to talk about Grandma's house, she began, and there was that special tone in her voice that I had always been afraid of since childhood. What about him? I asked, already starting to defend myself internally. I saw my mother and my stepfather exchange glances. It was the kind of look that didn't bode well. You have to admit that you already have enough real estate, my stepfather finally spoke up, leaning forward so that his chair creaked pitifully under his weight. Richard's house, the rental apartment, and now this one. I gripped the mug tighter. And we think it's only fair that you give up the inheritance in favor of Jessica, her mother said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I blinked, not immediately understanding the meaning of her words. In favor of Jessica? She always felt deprived, her mother continued, as if that explained something. You know she's never had the support you do. Her father couldn't afford much for her, unlike yours. And now you have the opportunity to do what's right. I looked down into my cup, as if hoping to find the answer there, but the coffee just darkened, reflecting my own confusion. Grandma left the house to me, I said slowly, as if chewing every word, trying to make sure they sounded as logical as they did in my head. She just didn't understand what she was doing, her stepfather said, waving her off. So you think that she wasn't sane enough to make a decision, but at the same time, for some reason, this decision should be changed in favor of Jessica? I felt the familiar heat of irritation rising. The mother sighed. Just think about it, Penelope. You don't want to ruin your relationship with your sister because of this, do you? I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling the smell of coffee, stew, the smell of my own childhood, which now seemed to be unfolding against me. I'll think about it, I replied in a flat voice, even though I already knew I wouldn't give up the house. I looked at them, feeling how the air in the room became as heavy as lead, as their words, subtle, carefully weighed, but at the same time arrogant and peremptory, hung in this space, filling it with a sticky, suffocating wave of expectation. I saw my mother nod, and her perfectly manicured nails tapped on the surface of the cup, creating a measured, annoying rhythm that made my inner tremble. Jessica was fighting, you know, she continued in her soft, persuasive tone, honed over many years of manipulation, making you feel guilty even before you realize what exactly. She has been renting this tiny apartment for years, in fact, no more than a closet, and her salary in the city administration. Well, you know how they pay in the civil service. I was silent, watching as steam rose from my cooling coffee, as thin streams disappeared into the air, just as my patience was disappearing. We thought it would be fair if you gave her grandma's house. My mother reached across the table, covering my hand with her cool, dry hand. You were so blessed, Penelope, and Jessica. It wasn't easy for her. Before I could respond, my stepfather intervened, cocking his head to the side with that fake smile he probably thought was friendly. After all, it's not a particularly valuable property, right? You're not really losing anything. But it would mean so much to your sister. I sat there, stunned by their audacity, but at the same time feeling the familiar guilt that had been ingrained in me since childhood, the one that always forced me to give in, to meet halfway, to put other people's needs above my own, reawakening in the depths of my soul. They're right, I really had more than Jessica. The house wasn't worth a lot of money. But something inside me resisted, something whispered insistently, "Don't agree." "Have you discussed this with Jessica?" I asked, even though the answer was already evident in the way they exchanged glances. "Well, we wanted to talk to you first," the mother said hurriedly, but then, as if remembering something important, she added, "It's been so hard for her lately. She broke up with that guy, the one from the bank, remember?" I didn't remember. Or, to be honest, I realized that I hadn't known much about my sister's life lately. When was the last time we had a real conversation? Maybe for Christmas. And even then it was just empty words, talking about the weather, complaining about work, nothing personal, nothing real. But they didn't know anything about my life either. They didn't know that Tommy's health had started to deteriorate. At first, everything looked insignificant: fatigue, weakness, bruises that appeared on the body for no reason. It seemed that no matter how much time he spent outdoors, the sun did not give him strength, and playing with friends ended in rapid exhaustion. He had been ill since birth, but doctors assured him that it would pass, that his immune system was just slowly forming. I listened, nodded, and convinced myself that it was true. But you can't fool your mother's intuition. It was only when he fainted right in his room that I finally realized that everything was much more serious. That day, I was sitting in Dr. Martinez's office, where the walls were decorated with bright children's drawings, cheerful, as if mockingly contrasting with the painful expectation that squeezed my chest with an icy hand of fear. Dr. Martinez looked at me for a long, sad moment before carefully sliding a thin folder of test results toward me. "It's acute lymphoblastic leukemia," she said softly. "I know it's shocking, but we need to start treatment immediately." I squeezed Tommy's hand, who was sitting next to me, small, pale, fragile, like a porcelain figurine. "What are his chances?" I gasped, but I already knew what I was going to hear in response. "Every case is different," she began evasively, but there was more in her eyes than in her words. "However, based on the latest analyses..." I didn't let her finish. "The treatment doesn't help as much as you hoped, does it?" Dr. Martinez pressed her lips into a thin line before nodding. "We're seeing disturbing trends," she admitted. I nodded, feeling the ground give way beneath my feet, as all the words around me lost their meaning, dissolving into the hum of blood in my ears. I came back to this moment. The kitchen table. Parents. Their expectation. They didn't know. They didn't know that I didn't have the opportunity to think about Jessica and her problems. They didn't know that my nights were now filled with fear clutching my chest, that every new day begins with a convulsive glance at Tommy, hoping that he looks at least a little better, that his eyes are not so dull, and his skin is not so transparent. They didn't know that this house, which they were so easily ready to give up, now seemed to me the only island of stability, the only thing that still belonged to me, which could give at least some kind of support. I looked at my mother, at my stepfather, and realized that nothing had changed for them. They still believed that they could guide me, that I would obey, that I would give in again, that I would put my sister's needs above my own, because that's how it's always been. But this time it was different. I couldn't afford to be weak this time. The following months turned into a blur of hospital corridors, the sterile smell of antiseptics, long hours spent in uncomfortable armchairs next to Tommy's bed, and constant waiting for news, good or bad, but news that would at least slightly disperse the unbearable uncertainty. The chemotherapy sessions were followed by short periods of improvement, and then by new complications, as if the disease was playing with us, allowing us to hope, only to take away that hope again. Richard, despite our divorce, never left his son's side. All of his usual cold, businesslike demeanor was gone when it came to Tommy. His voice no longer had the restrained confidence with which he ran a business and made deals. Now it sounded like the helplessness of a man who would do anything to get back what money couldn't buy. Whatever he needs, whatever it takes, he repeated over and over, clenching his fingers into fists, as if trying to keep the situation under control by willpower. I will make sure that he gets the best treatment available. I was on the edge, between the hospital, work, the need to hold on for my son, and now also this pressure from the family because of the house. Perhaps that's why I gave up so easily when my parents offered to give it to Jessica. Against the background of Tommy's struggle for life, everything else seemed insignificant, unimportant, meaningless. I don't even remember exactly how I made the decision. It's just that one day, in the middle of a long day filled with medical procedures, anxious stares from doctors, and my boy's tired breathing, I called Jessica and said, "I'll give you the documents as soon as everything settles down with Tommy's treatment." I barely realized what I was saying, already mentally going over in my head the dates of the next doctor's appointment and the test results, which did not go beyond the acceptable limits. "Oh my God, thank you, she exclaimed, and the next moment I felt her hands on my shoulders, an embrace, unexpected and so unusual that I froze. I couldn't remember the last time she hugged me. "I'm going to have the best housewarming party in the world," she continued, her voice ringing with excitement. "In a month. You'll come, and so will Tommy, if he's fit." I just nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. I looked at my son, his small face, which had become almost transparent from pallor, his haggard cheeks, his eyes, which used to sparkle with childish delight, but now dimmed with fatigue. "Mom," he asked me one night as I sat by his bed, holding his tiny hand in mine. "Yes, dear. Am I going to be okay?" I swallowed, suppressing a sudden wave of tears, and smiled at him, gently running my hand through his fine, soft hair. "Of course you will," I lied. I said it with such confidence, as if the words themselves had the power to change reality. And for a while it seemed like they were really working. There was hope. Tommy reacted to the new treatment protocol. His complexion improved a little. He began to eat more, even showed interest in toys that had previously been forgotten on the hospital bedside table. The doctors started talking about cautious optimism, and for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to believe that maybe we would get out of this nightmare. "Mommy, can we go to the park this weekend?" "What is it?" he asked one morning, and my heart skipped a beat. It was the first time in months that he wanted to go outside. "As soon as you're strong enough, baby," I promised, fighting back tears. "We'll go to the park and feed the ducks, like before." "Can I invite Dad?" "Of course." I really believed that everything was getting better. And then everything collapsed. The call from the hospital came at 3 o'clock in the morning, waking me from an anxious sleep. Tommy was admitted to the department with a high fever the day before, but the doctors assured me that it was nothing more than a minor complication, that there was nothing to worry about. "Mrs. Peterson, you need to come to the hospital immediately." The nurse's voice was professional, but soft, with an intonation that made everything go cold inside. "Tommy's condition has deteriorated significantly." I don't remember how I got to the hospital. I only remember the blurred outlines of the streets, the cold glare of streetlights on the wet asphalt, the occasional car passing by. I ran a red light 3 times, but I didn't care. The only thing I could think about was how to get to my boy. But by the time I got to the hospital, it was too late. I saw the doctors leaning over his bed. I saw the nurses fussing, the 4 lines tangled in a chaotic tangle of wires, as if helplessly clinging to him. But I already knew. I saw it in their eyes, in the way one of the nurses hugged herself by the shoulders, as Dr. Martinez, the one who always remained calm, pressed her lips so that they turned white. They were losing this battle. And I was forced to watch my son slip away from me, and I couldn't do anything to keep him. The next few hours turned into a nightmare of medical terms, the hectic actions of the staff, the alarming sounds of the machines, which were increasingly interrupted by a sharp, deafening squeak, marking another lost hope, another step towards the inevitable, another unsuccessful attempt to rescue my son from the clutches of death. I didn't understand the words that were being spoken around me. I couldn't make out the faces flashing before my eyes. I couldn't feel time. Just this painful, all-consuming horror that squeezed my chest with iron pincers, not allowing me to breathe. And then there was a crushing silence. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Peterson," Dr. Martinez's voice cracked as she said those words. "We did everything we could. His body was simply too weak to fight any further." I didn't say anything. I was just sitting by his bed, holding his small, already cooling hand and looking at his face, so familiar, so serene, as if he was just sleeping. My beautiful, brave, strong boy. I was waiting for him to open his eyes, to take his usual funny breath, as he used to when he fell asleep too deeply, but no. He was silenced now. As the sun began to rise above the horizon, turning the world pale pink in the morning, Richard entered the room. I didn't look at him. I knew he was there, I knew he saw what I saw, but I didn't have the energy to talk. "Mel." His voice was hoarse, choked, and he knelt next to me, hugging me to him, but I barely felt the touch. "Oh, my God, Mel." At some point, through a thick fog of pain, I texted Jessica. "Tommy is dead. The funeral is in 3 days." Her reply came in 5 minutes. "Good." Just one word. In lowercase letters. Without emotion, without condolences, without a hint of understanding that my world had collapsed now, that the child she had known since birth, whom she held in her arms, whom she once affectionately called niece, no longer existed. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't accept it. I dialed my mother's number, needing her voice, the comfort that only she could give. "Oh, yes, Jessica told us," she said, and there was no sadness or shock in her voice. Just a slight absent-mindedness, as if I had reminded her of something insignificant. I froze. "Listen, dear, about the funeral. We can't come. We already have other commitments on this day." I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the world around me deviate from its usual axis. "Other obligations?" I asked, sure I'd misheard. "Yes," she continued in a flat voice, "Jessica has a housewarming party that day, and I promised to help her prepare. You understand, don't you? Such things take a lot of effort, and we've already invited everyone. It would be troublesome to reschedule." I gripped the phone tighter, my fingers white with tension. "Mom," I barely recognized my voice. It was so flat, almost alien. "This is Tommy's funeral. We're talking about your grandson's funeral." "I know, dear," her voice trembled, but not from grief, but from mild annoyance, as if I were bringing up an uncomfortable topic. "And it's very sad. But life goes on, doesn't it? Jessica has been planning this party for weeks, and we can't disappoint her guests." Something inside me cracked. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't accept it. The world lost its meaning the moment Tommy's heart stopped beating, but what my mother told me was beyond comprehension. How could she? How could she put a party above her grandson's memory? How could she so easily erase him from her life, as if he had never existed? My hands were shaking as I dialed Jessica's number. She answered on the second ring. "What the hell are you thinking?" My breath was coming in short gasps, and my voice rose to a scream. "Why are you throwing a party on the day of Tommy's funeral?" There was a short pause on the other end of the line, and then her voice was steady, calm, and cold. "Because this is the day I want to arrange it." Somewhere in the background, music was playing, a light, carefree tune that was discordant with the pain that was tearing me apart from the inside out. I could hear her walking around the new house, her heels clicking on the floor, as she moved something, perhaps decorations for an upcoming party. "I've been planning this," she continued. "All invitations have been sent. Jessica, this is my son's funeral." I shouted, feeling rage boiling in my chest. "My son, your nephew. The little boy who made you postcards for every birthday. Can't you just reschedule the party?" "Why should I?" She snapped, and there was irritation in her voice, as if I was the one who was being unreasonable. Something crashed in the background. "It's just a funeral, Penelope. He's dead anyway. He doesn't care when he lies down in the ground. But I'm alive. And I want to celebrate my new home." She paused, and then added in a more even, satisfied voice, "You know how long I've been waiting for this." The phone slipped out of my numb fingers, hitting the kitchen floor with a thud. At that moment, something inside me broke, like a thin, long-cracked plate of glass, which I tried to keep intact until the last moment, not noticing how it was already covered with a network of barely visible cracks. But along with this crack, something else was born inside of me, hard, cold, ruthless, which knew no doubts. I remembered how Jessica hugged me when I cried after Tommy's disappointing diagnosis. I remembered how she whispered to me that she would always be there for me, that she would support me, that family was the most important thing. Now I saw how much it was a lie. Those touches, words, her pathetic attempts to appear like a caring sister, all this was nothing more than a game played out in front of me, in front of my parents, in front of herself. Tommy's funeral now seemed like a blur to me, a series of black clothes, muffled voices, empty condolences that fell from the lips of people who did not know what to say, but felt that they had to say something. Richard was standing next to me. His constant presence was the only thing that kept me on my feet. From time to time, his hand would find mine, squeezing it for several long seconds as grief rose in my throat and threatened to tear me apart from the inside out. The mother and stepfather showed up for exactly 10 minutes. They looked unnatural in their festive outfits, clumsily hidden under hastily thrown-on black coats. They did not bring flowers, did not approach the coffin, did not say a single word of comfort. "We can't stay long," my mother whispered, avoiding my gaze, as if she knew that if she met him, her shield of indifference would crack. "Jessica needs help with the preparation." I watched them go, but I felt nothing, no pain, no anger, no disappointment. Where my heart had once been, there was now a cold void. Their car didn't even leave the parking lot when I saw my mother checking her phone. She's probably coordinating the last details of the party with Jessica so that everything goes perfectly, so that none of the guests will guess that they were supposed to be at her grandson's funeral that day. "Have you heard about Jessica's party?" My cousin Sarah whispered softly to me during the memorial dinner, her eyes flashing with indignation. "She invited half the city. None of us will go, of course. This is wrong." We all told her that, but she wouldn't listen. I nodded, but I barely heard her anymore. The plan formed in my head with amazing clarity, as if it were written on a blank sheet of paper. Grandma's house was still legally mine. Yes, Jessica had the keys, but there was no title deed, no signed papers, and no legitimate reason to consider it her own. At 6 o'clock in the evening, when the party was supposed to be in full swing, I made 2 calls. The first one is to the police. "Good evening," I said in a flat voice, pronouncing each word clearly. "I want to report an illegal invasion of my property. People are using my house without permission." I gave him the address. The second call is to my lawyer. "Please confirm that all the documents for the house are still registered to me." "Of course, Penelope," he replied with mild surprise, flipping through the papers. "The house legally belongs to you. No property transfers have been processed." I thanked him, turned off the phone and went to my grandmother's house. When I pulled up, The music was blaring so loudly that the vibration could be felt even through the closed windows of my car. I could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, someone's excited voice. Through the lighted windows, I could see people dancing, pouring drinks, having fun carelessly, as if this was an ordinary party, and not the day my son died. Jessica stood in the center of the living room, dressed in an elegant new dress, with a perfect hairstyle, with a perfect smile, playing the hostess of the house that legally belonged to me. I got out of the car just as the police arrived at the house. They were professional and collected. One of them got out of the car, the other stayed in the cabin while I calmly, without unnecessary emotions, handed the documents to the officer. "This is my property," I said, and there was no tremor or doubt in my voice. The officer studied the papers carefully, then nodded and signaled his colleague. The music stopped abruptly, as if someone had pulled a wire out of an outlet. The hum of voices died away, laughter died on the lips of the guests, and Jessica, who had been beaming with pleasure, turned pale when she saw me. "These people are here without my permission," I continued, not taking my eyes off her. For a second, deafening silence hung in the house, then chaos broke out. People began to whisper, awkwardly look at each other. Some were already heading for the exit, not wanting to deal with the police. Jessica's face contorted, first with embarrassment, then with anger. "What are you doing?" she hissed, running up to me. "This is my house." "No," I replied coldly. "This is my house. Legally. Legally. Documented." I saw her guests leaving the house, casting puzzled glances in her direction. Her carefully prepared snacks remained untouched on the tables. The expensive decorations chosen to create the right atmosphere now seemed cheap and tasteless in the light of reality. "You gave it to me," Jessica shouted furiously. "No," I said firmly, not taking my eyes off her. "I made a mistake, but now I've fixed it." She opened her mouth, but at that moment one of the officers stepped forward. "Either your guests will leave voluntarily, or we will begin to formalize the detention for trespassing," he said calmly. I saw Jessica hesitating, clenching her fists, and her eyes flashing with hatred. But even she knew that she had lost. I turned around and walked out without looking back. Jessica screamed, her voice breaking into a hysterical scream, mascara streaming down her face in black streaks as she pointed at me in desperation, almost rushing forward, as if hoping to tear this reality to pieces, make it different, bend it to her will. "Tell them, Mom," she screamed, grabbing her mother's hand, trying to get her on her side. "Tell them how she promised me this house." My mother and stepfather rushed to us, their faces distorted with confusion, anxiety, and an attempt to maintain control of the situation, but without documents, without any confirmation. Their words were an empty sound, a dusty husk falling from their lips and falling to the floor without any weight. "This is my property," I repeated calmly, standing in the middle of the ruined party, in the very center of Jessica's perfect world, which was crumbling before her eyes, crumbling like a house of cards. I looked straight into her distorted face, into her eyes full of fierce, boiling hatred, and with icy calmness I said, "Show me the documents. Show me the papers that say that I legally transferred this house to you." When the last of the guests finally left the house, when even Jessica's most devoted friends, those who at first tried to pretend that nothing special had happened, slipped away into the darkness of the street, she exploded. Her face, powdered, smooth, and well-groomed a few minutes ago, was contorted with rage that I had never seen before. All her ostentatious friendliness, all the years of forced smiles, all that fake caring and sisterly affection, none of that was left. "You're arrogant, damn you!" she yelled, grabbing the nearest vase and hurling it against the wall. Glass shattered into 100 pieces, water splashed to the sides, rose petals fell to the floor like cut lies, like the last drop of her lost triumph. "You always had everything," she continued, her voice trembling, not from tears, but from rage, not from pain, but from resentment that she had been deprived of what she believed was rightfully hers. A rich husband, a big house, universal sympathy. I was silent. I hate you. She growled, her face contorted as if her teeth hurt, as if every bone in her body ached with anger. I'm glad your husband left you. And I'm glad your Brad is dead. Silence. Those words fell into her like stones into water, leaving ripples on the surface. I looked at my mother. I expected to see horror, shock, even a slight disgust, but none of this happened. She stepped forward, approached Jessica as if to protect her, and lifted her chin with an expression I'd never seen on her before. You've always been selfish, Penelope, she said, and her voice was filled not with grief, but with icy contempt. I always thought you were better than everyone else. I didn't answer. Just because I married a rich man. Just because you had a sick child. Her lips curled into a sneer that seemed almost unnatural to me. Everyone felt sorry for you. Something clenched inside me, but it didn't break. I looked at them both. At the mother. At Jessica. And I realized that all my life I had been trying to be good for them, trying to earn their love, their respect, their recognition. I supported them financially, transferred $1,500 to them every month without exception, sent them gifts for Christmas and birthdays, and arranged small pleasant surprises for my mother, simply because. I paid for their cruise last year, and I gave them money to fix the kitchen and my stepfather's car. I've done everything for them. And now I was standing in front of them and I saw them openly taking the side of the man who had just celebrated the death of my child. Let me make something clear, I said, my voice flat and cold, like ice that couldn't be melted. They tensed up. From this moment, the money stops. The mother turned pale. That's it. Absolutely everything. Jessica clenched her fists. Penelope. The stepfather took a step forward, blushing, as if he had just been humiliated in front of an audience. Let's take our time. We all say things that we'll regret later when we're upset. I mean every word, I interrupted him, my voice clear, ringing, the kind that made their hearts clench inside. You won't get a dime from me anymore. The mother took a sharp breath, her hands clenched on her chest, as if she did not believe that this could actually happen. You wouldn't dare. What is it? She gasped. I smiled. I would. But we're your family. Jessica screamed, throwing her arms in the air. No, I shook my head, and for the first time in a long time, I felt really at ease. A family doesn't do that. You chose a housewarming party instead of your grandson's funeral, I turned to my mother. She looked away. You're defending a man who just told me he was glad my child was dead, I said to my stepfather. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Parents don't do that, I said. You're just people. People who have nothing to do with me anymore. I turned around, heading for the door, leaving them in their emptiness, in their resentment, in their world, which collapsed for them just as it once collapsed for me. It's not over yet. Jessica shouted after me, her voice full of menace, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew that her world depended on them now, and they depended on me. And I just deprived them of their main source of additional income. The next day, social media literally exploded, my mother's tearful posts about the cruelty of her daughter, who turned away from her family, Jessica's anguished comments that I made her homeless, but, of course, not a word that they themselves chose a party instead of Tommy's funeral, that they preferred a holiday. Mourning that they didn't even try to hide their indifference. The truth came out quickly. Our relatives, friends, acquaintances, everyone who attended the funeral, who saw the invitations to the party, who witnessed the whole disgusting spectacle, knew what really happened. No one could understand how Jessica could arrange a celebration on the day when we said goodbye to my son, and how my mother could contribute to this. Who throws a party on the day of their nephew's funeral? My cousin Sarah wrote in the comments, not mincing her words. And who helps to prepare for this party instead of going to his grandson's funeral? Shame on you all. The reaction was instant and merciless. Jessica's posts about her sister's betrayal were met not with support, but with disgust. People started sharing the story of her heartless celebration. There were those who knew about my financial support all these years, and information about exactly how I took care of my family spread across the internet. There were too many comments. She was humiliated, condemned, despised. Soon she was forced to close her social media accounts, but even that didn't help. Her story went viral. Everyone found out who she really was. Months have passed. I started to recover. I attended weekly therapy sessions, learned to live with the hole in my heart left by Tommy's death, learned to breathe anew, learned not to wake up every night from the emptiness in the house, from the silence in which there was neither his voice nor his laughter. Dr. Anderson helped me overcome layers of pain, and not just the pain of losing my son. He helped me realize that I had long been grieving not only for Tommy, but also for the family I thought I had. But the past was in no hurry to let me go. One evening, I got a call from a neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who lived across the street from my grandmother's house. "Penelope, I didn't mean to bother you, but you seem to have a problem there. I hear glass shattering." When I arrived, everything was clear without words. Broken windows. Shards of glass on the ground, like a scattering of stars in the moonlight. I looked at the surveillance footage that I had installed a few months ago and saw her. Jessica. She methodically walked around the house, her face distorted with hatred. Her movements were fast, sharp. She threw stones at the windows. Her lips whispered something, and anger burned in her eyes. I didn't hesitate. I filed a lawsuit. My mother called a few days later, her voice filled with hysterical panic. "Penelope, you're going to ruin her career," she wailed. "She will lose her job in the city administration. Think about her future." I was silent. "She was just upset," her mother pleaded. "You can't be that cruel, can you?" I took a deep breath, studied my breathing, then calmly replied, "The same way she was thinking about Tommy's funeral." And she hung up. Jessica was fired. When the video of her vandalism went viral, the city council made a quick decision to get rid of her. The court ordered her to pay fines and pay damages. The last I heard about her, she was unemployed, with a ruined reputation, and my parents, having lost my support, could no longer help her. Her prestigious position has become another victim of her own hatred. Some might call it cruel. But I didn't feel remorse. Every time I visited Tommy's grave, I remembered Jessica's words, her laughter, her celebration on the day of his death, and realized that some things were unforgivable. Dr. Anderson asked me yesterday, "Are you thinking about reconciliation?" I looked out the window of his office, where a spring tree was blooming behind the glass. "They're not my family anymore," I replied softly. "A family doesn't do that. I'm learning to live anew, day by day. Tommy taught me unconditional love, the kind that persists even when your heart is broken into a million pieces. Jessica taught me unconditional hate, the kind that consumes everything it touches. And I've learned that sometimes the family you were born into isn't the one you'll end up with. When I sit in my quiet house and look at Tommy's photos, I know I made the right choice. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. Sometimes the only way to honor the memory of those we have lost is to sever ties with those who dishonor their passing.